Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Tuesday, April the 20th, 2021. Well, it's verdict day in the Derek Chauvin trial, and he was found guilty. I don't know whether the happy riots have yet begun, but I am expecting them. Earlier during the trial, I assumed that, or it was my prediction. I'm not very good at these short-term predictions, but I thought that we'd likely have a mistrial. And then the interventions began. We had the riot in the suburb to the north, and the politicians started putting their oar in. This is from The Hill. President Biden placed a call to the family of George Floyd on Monday as the country awaits a verdict in the trial of the former Minneapolis police officer. Philanese Floyd, the younger brother of the deceased Floyd, said during an interview on NBC's Today that Biden phoned the family to let them know they are in his prayers. He was just calling. He knows how it is to lose a family member, and he knows the process of what we are going through, Floyd said. So he was just letting us know he was praying for us and hoping that everything will come out to be okay. That's basically it. A close family were the Floyds. It's not my understanding. He had, 2 or 3 children that he didn't even know. But perhaps Philanese Floyd is in a better mood because of that $27 million settlement to the family from the city of Minneapolis, which is an outrageous intervention in the trial. You have a criminal verdict first, and then you get a civil verdict afterwards. The city of Minneapolis was saying up front that Derek Chauvin was guilty. Back to The Hill, Biden has previously spoken to and met with the Floyd family. Why? In the wake of George Floyd's death at the hands of now former police officer Derek Chauvin, Biden, who has been following the trial closely, is expected to address the case in some capacity after a verdict is released. The nation is on edge, awaiting the verdict, with federal and local leaders bracing for the potential for unrest, following the trial's conclusion. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Monday that the administration has been engaging with elected officials and authorities in Minnesota, and said Biden is urging demonstrators to remain peaceful. Well, they're always peaceful, aren't they? Well, certainly mostly or overwhelmingly peaceful. Oh, I just thought I'd mention this. This is just, okay, clown world. Ana Navarro Cardenas tweeted April the 19th, quoting the prosecutor's closing words in the trial, "You were told Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. After seeing the evidence, you know Mr. Floyd died because Derek Chauvin's heart was too small." He actually said that, yes. And I wondered whether he held up an onion to his eye as he said it. Oh, and Greg Gutfeld of Fox News, who is just so very right-wing, said, quote, "I'm glad he was found guilty on all charges, even if he might not be guilty of all charges," unquote. Well, that's easy enough for Greg Gutfeld to say, because he's not about to become the rape toy of black prisoners now, is he? Okay, more interventions. Psaki, that would be the aforementioned Jen Psaki, pelted with questions about Biden opening on Chauvin verdict in testy briefing. How is that ever appropriate? Moments earlier in the Oval Office, the president, noting that the jury in the murder trial of the former Minneapolis police officer is now sequestered, said that he had spoken to the family. Yes. "I'm praying the verdict is the right verdict," Biden said. "The evidence is overwhelming in my view." AP's John Lemire said to Psaki, "What precisely did the president mean? What is overwhelming? And does this president think the former police officer should be convicted on all counts?" The press secretary would not expand on Biden's comments. Lemire came back with, "You're not able to clarify what is overwhelming, the evidence, the case presented by the prosecution. We're not going to get ahead of the outcome," Psaki reiterated, or repeated, as a normal person would write. "I expect when there's a verdict, he will have more to say." The AP correspondent then probed as to whether Biden's comments could prompt unrest across the country. "We know there are worries about unrest," Lemire said. "Is there now concern that the president's comments could add to that if the right verdict is not reached?" Lemire concluded by noting that Chauvin trial judge Peter Cahill condemned remarks from Representative Maxine Waters and stating that they may have given the former police officer's attorneys grounds to appeal should the jury return a guilty verdict. The AP correspondent questioned whether Biden's comments could have a similar impact. "The jury is sequestered," which the president also noted in his comments, Psaki said. "Yes, completely cut off the world. Have no idea of events in Minneapolis or elsewhere." Okay, from CNN, George Floyd's brother, who is now apparently a celebrity, bonds with Emmett Till's cousin over brutal public deaths decades apart. Is Emmett Till's cousin a celebrity now? And how is Emmett Till still in the news? When was Emmett Till killed? 1955. That's when Emmett Till was killed. But as Steve Saylor remarks, the New York Times keeps dragging him out back into the news as if he had been lynched the day before yesterday. From ABC News, Democrats block GOP move to censure Maxine Waters for Chauvin comments. House Democrats Tuesday successfully killed a privilege revolution brought forth by Republicans that was censured Waters for comments she made in Minnesota, calling on protesters to, quote, "get more confrontational," unquote, if former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is not convicted. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy filed the resolution on the House floor Tuesday afternoon, and Democrats immediately voted to move to table it. The vote to table the resolution was 216 to 220 along party lines with no defections. "I hope that we are going to get a verdict that says guilty, 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 and if we don't, then we cannot go away," Waters said. Maxine Waters, not a fan of the police. Despite that, according to Jordan Davidson of The Federalist, Waters requested an armed police escort to an anti-police protest in a Minneapolis suburb this weekend, reported Town Hall. While at the event, Waters called for riots if former police officer Chauvin is not found guilty. "We got to get more confrontational. We got to make sure that they know that we mean business." Mere hours after Waters made her speech, 2 Minnesota National Guard members sustained injuries from a drive-by shooting. As noted by The Federalist, the largest corporate outlets drew no connection between Waters' rhetoric and the ensuing violence, despite their willingness to do so with former President Donald Trump, who also put thumbs on the scale. Why, that would be the effeminate mayor of Minneapolis. I can hardly believe that this is a man in his 40s. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said that regardless of the decision made by the jury, there is one true reality: that George Floyd was killed at the hands of the police. Al Sharpton also showed up on a private jet belonging to Tyler Perry. I suppose Sharpton is no longer in the number one race grifter in America. He's been supplanted by others, but he still likes to keep his hand in. And this is from HuffPost, Lee Moran. Fox News' Tucker Carlson on Monday again sought to sow doubt about the circumstances surrounding George Floyd's death. After closing arguments, the video of Chauvin kneeling on his neck. Yes. We know all about that. Carlson contended that most Americans still cannot say with any specificity just how Floyd died. So the closing arguments are a chance to assess actual evidence in the case, and you would think that would be good news, more facts, which we could always use, he continued. But no, said the media, facts no longer matter, not when BLM's founding myth is at stake. Evidence only counts in countries that have due process, something they are now telling us is an ugly relic of institutional racism. When unpopular people seem guilty, you just go ahead and punish them. That's the new rule. Years ago, we called this lynching. Now we call it equity. I mentioned previously that Thomas Fleming, the former editor of Chronicle, said some years ago that the United States had reverted to status justice. That is, that you are judged by your peers, directly by your peers. That is to say, clergy judged by clergy, lords judged by lords, etc., etc. And since George Floyd has been named a saint, I mean, you can see what Father Jim of the Jesuits, no, he's another Christ. Well, obviously, the people who killed the modern Christ are going to have to suffer the maximum penalty of the law. Are they not? I mean, it would be blasphemous to do any less. Let's look at the chat, and the chat is back today. I'm sorry that it wasn't there yesterday. I was racking my brains trying to figure out why not. Looking at videos, how-to videos. It turns out it was rather simple. I believe that I didn't click on this video is not for children, and thus the chat did not appear. Andrea Daly says that in 2020, the Democrats needed the black vote to bring down Trump, and so they let blacks run riot and be hailed as saints and heroes. Hello to Palcasso88, Chogokin 666. You know, I never thought, well, if you look at the jury didn't deliberate for all that long, really. If you remember the OJ case, when the jury came back so very quickly, I knew immediately that he was going to be found not guilty. And I said this to the esteemed Colby Kosh of the National Post, with whom I was then working, and he told me pretty much that I was an idiot, that it would be not possible for O.J. Simpson to be found not guilty in this case. So we were at the newsroom and the TV couldn't work, so we drove all the way back to the house where a bunch of the journalists lived, and we watched it, and the verdict was announced, and Colby Kosh looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. I mean, he could not believe it. And then it got worse, of course, when we saw the side-by-side pictures of black people screaming in exultation and white people looking like they'd just been punched in the stomach. I think it was a political verdict then and a political verdict now. Anron says, I'm reliably informed that the always smarter than you Monterey College president predicted not guilty on all counts today. What a maroon. I didn't see that. Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, glad to see you back. Thank you for your service. Says, found guilty for the same crime 3 different ways. Overturned on appeal, says Chogokin 666. Well, of course, appeals are supposed to be based solely on matters of law and not on fact. So, I don't know, the jury deciding that Floyd's health, the blockages in his arteries, which in one case went up to 90%, were not relevant, that he had 3 times the amount of fentanyl in his bloodstream, 3 times more than fatal, not relevant. Or just the audacity of the prosecutor presenting an expert witness saying, no, the size of a man is no gauge of his possible dangerousness. Oh, the amount of drugs a man has consumed is no sign of his potential dangerousness. No, it'll all come down to matters of law. And of course, any judge who rules in Chauvin's favor at the appellate court level is going to be a marked man. There's no other way to put it. Hello to Professor Paul. Chogan 666 says Philanese. It's spelled with a PH. Roulette Crack says the U.S. has just entered the fourth world. Anran says don't hold your breath or bet any money on it being overturned. Chogacan 66 feel bad for defendant, and it sets a bad precedent, but relieved that civil disorder might be avoided. I don't know. I don't know why the Minneapolis police are going to do any policing in the future. Chauvin was fired pretty much immediately, as were the 3 other officers involved. We don't need a trial. No, you're fired. Just like that. Riots have broken out, so you've got to go. If you look at the officer who killed the gentle giant, Michael Brown, he was found out. He was fired, despite the fact that he was completely exonerated by an exhaustive study by the Department of Justice. Yeah, he got fired anyway. So what's the lesson there? Don't enforce the law. Gamian says, just another mini stroke of the dying West. I feel terrible for Chauvin, the man, though. What a travesty. William Hicks asks, the chat on tonight? Indeed, it is. Chad Chadson, again, this day will be known as a National Rhodesia Day. Tony V says, Biden is a politician. He doesn't believe in prayer. I suspect he believes that he has a very deep and close and personal relationship to our Savior, which is based on, not our Savior's needs, but on Joe Biden's needs. Joe Biden asks, and then he receives. Steve says, why be a police officer at all? Why serve a state that hates you and throw you to the wolves? Well, that is an excellent question. Popcasso88 repeats my catchphrase from Shiva Naipaul, universal mental retardation. Ed McNeck, yes, late-breaking Emmett Till news. William Hicks says, Kevin, I thought maybe you were getting tired of our usual claptrap. I thought, no, not true. I always enjoy the chat. I just made a mistake when setting up the show. And no, I'm not exhausted. But I was watching a fine, short, about 20-minute documentary from George Rockall Smith on YouTube. And he was talking about the great variances in death rates around the world, even among American states. And the conclusion that he came to, citing various studies, particularly an exhaustive one in Britain, is that it has to do with level of status. And people who suffer from low status typically have elevated rates of cortisol, which is a deadly substance. That's the fight or flight stuff. In other words, stress kills. Roulette Crack says, time for the police to make a stand and go on national strike, but they won't. Gamian says, time to rename this clown country to Wakanda. A John Galt movement should stop, not just from cops, says David Wright. Don't quite get that. We have it on pretty good authority that in the OJ case, the white jurors were browbeaten by the black jurors. That it was made clear to them that you are not going to vote for conviction. If you're in favor of conviction, you're going to have to change your vote because, well, we know who you are. Jay Miller says, let's give props to Chauvin for wearing a mask in court. LOL. Yeah, that's the worst of his dangers, COVID-19. Steve says police will sit in the squad car and make up fake contact reports all shift. Chokin 666, anyone who followed the trial could see the prosecution had no case. Fry, that weepy idiot. Yes, he is weepy, and he's fond of dancing in public. Very amusing. There he was kneeling in front of the catafalque of George Floyd, again, as if he were a saint. Hello to Metal Mike. Chad Chadson says Biden and Obama called the family to tell him to stop discrediting the BLM movement. I've seen that argument, but I disagree. This is raw power. When a man as worthless as George Floyd is extolled as a saint, this tells you who has the power and who doesn't. If George Floyd were a clean living man, maybe it had some ups and downs or whatever, but was truly getting his life together again, that would be one thing. But he wasn't. And you look at practically all of these cases, you see the same thing. Remember the jogger? Well, it turns out the jogger has a list of offenses like this long. And they typically involve, guess what? Robbery and theft. Okay, that Irish doctor was a wee twit, says Chogokin. A six. Hello to ultra testosterone. Okay, let's get back to it here. Okay. Do I want to read this one? Is it going to load? I guess that's the first question. Yeah, I talked about Al Sharpton swanking in his private plane. Well, not his, but Tyler Perry's. Let's see. Minneapolis seeks to ensure the city will burn by crippling the police response. There's a lot of this in Andy No's book on Antifa, which I'm going to be discussing on the book club on Friday. The Minneapolis City Council, an unbelievable move, given the powder keg on the doorstep, voted 11-1 to oppose the use of tear gas and other non-lethal munitions in response to civil disorder. It would be fair to wonder if someone dropped these 11 elected leaders on their heads as children. Yeah, that's my go-to line. I use that one a lot. Oh, yes, this is an oldie but a goodie from CNN. Camerata. What if in the middle of the night my home is broken into? Who do I call? And some activist named Bender, Minneapolis City Councilor. Yes, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors, and I know, and myself too, and I know that comes from a place of privilege. Joel Gilbert commented that George Floyd prosecutor ended his closing argument by saying it's about how the bystanders felt and about how the jurors feel rather than the actual law. They don't seem to be very afraid of the police. You will recall that when George Floyd is being subdued after going nuts and resisting arrest twice, that a considerable crowd gathered around, including that fat EMT and others, martial arts experts, screaming profanities at the police and threatening to beat them. Who wants to hang around a situation like that? It seems to me that situation could have gone, pear-shaped, even more than it did, in a real hurry. But they just want, even a civil employee like the EMT wants to know, and she's white, wants to let the police know just how much she hates the police. And I guess all America knows now. From Breitbart, Joel Pollack, Eric Garcetti, speaking of the OJ case, his father was the man who bungled the prosecution of OJ Simpson. Eric Garcetti replaces some policing therapists in new justice budget for LA. Okay, here we go. Therapeutic unarmed response for neighborhoods, or TURN. It's a time to recognize wrongs and to set them right. By giving up some power and admitting some errors, we can foster genuine safety from street to school to park to home. When situations don't need guns, let's not send guns. So this criminal justice budget funds a new approach we're calling TURN, Therapeutic Unarmed Response for Neighborhoods. That includes a nation-leading partnership with LA County starting next month to send clinicians instead of cops to respond to nonviolent mental health emergencies through 911 24/7. The goal? real results for Angelenos suffering from mental health challenges that too often go untreated. Yeah, one reads about these stories quite a lot, that the cop shows up and often a family member has called or a neighbor has called, and there's a person threatening to throw himself or herself off the balcony or such like, to mutilate themselves, to kill someone else, to harm the police. That's why they carry guns. What are these clinicians going to do? Talk them down? Perhaps, spray some lithium from an aerosol container? Garcetti also proposed more spending on community mediators to deal with gang violence, again, rather than police. And you know who they're going to send in? The experts on gang violence. Gangbangers. The Gang Reduction Youth Development Program, or GRID, ooh, that's awfully close to grids, is made up of contracted community intervention workers who have often lived experience. They have lived experience of gang life, but have turned their wounds into the power to heal. They mentor young people. They heal trauma. They stop violence before it starts. Again, this is a man in his, 40s or 50s? And he talks like that. Andy No, who I mentioned, Journalism is Dead. This is from the Citizen Free Press. This is how the Genius Legacy Media report on the arson attack by Antifa in downtown Portland. Even after it was declared a legal riot by police, this pro-Antifa reporter calls rioters protesters rather. And who is this? Sergio Olmos. Protesters started a fire on the side of the Apple store. The building itself is not on fire, but there are burning materials against it. The fire does not seem to be growing. It seems to be contained to the debris and not the building. At this point, it's burned. Oh, no, wait, later, the Apple store is now on fire. It's funny how that happens. Oh, yes, under the well actually file, journalists don't declare riots. Police do. Until then, it's a protest. Really, is that an official designation as well? And more from Sergio Olmos. On the use of language in this story, we don't describe breaking windows as violence. For violence, a sentient being must be involved. However, a multi-story building was set on fire, unknown if anyone was inside. Without being sure a building is empty, it is a violent act. Well, thank you for that. Andy No comments, this is ideology and has nothing to do with journalism. Unfortunately, this reporter applied for a leadership role in the Society of Professional Journalists, so we could teach this to others. And, Chris Cuomo. Oh, my God. Because this guy, I'll steal a joke from Community. If this guy get any nuttier, they'd have to give him a Grammy. Again, from Citizen Free Press, Chris Cuomo took things to his darkest level yet, and he went on an unhinged screed about how white people's kids need to be killed off in droves in order for gun control to be passed and the police to be abolished. After putting on a ridiculous voice and suggesting people who supported police believed comply or die, Cuomo's eyes became wild and manic as he described what was needed for reform to happen. Quote, and you know what the answer is. You really do. You don't like it. I don't like it. It scares me. Shootings, gun laws, access to weapons. Oh, I know when they'll change. Your kids start getting killed. White people's kids start getting killed, unquote. Does Chris Cuomo think that white kids are not being killed in America? He might want to look at who's killing them. Cuomo then concocted a perverted fantasy of a white kid getting killed and calls for reform afterward. Smoking that doobie that's actually legal probably in your state now, but they don't know what it was, and the kid runs and then pop, 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 pop. The cop was justified. Why did you run? Oh, he had a baseball game tonight. Oh, white kid, big family, that house over there. Those start piling up. What's going on with these people? Frantic noises. Maybe we shouldn't even have police. How did a guy this dumb get on TV? But it is CNN. And John Oliver, speaking of Community, who I quite enjoyed, playing a rather unpleasant and farcical psychology professor, is telling white Americans to march in the streets. Yes, in other words, you and him fight. I remember when he was drafted in to teach anthropology to replace Betty White, who had been suspended for attacking a student. He started off his lecture with, "What is anthropology?" And the students thought it was a rhetorical question, so they remained silent. And he says, "No, really, what is anthropology?" And someone said, "The study of man." He said, "The study of man? I thought psychology was a racket." Oh, yeah, this is a funny story. Golden Globes organizers apologize after ex-president sent members article that calls Black Lives Matter a racist hate movement and compares his work to Charles Manson. This Philip Burke fellow, the former president of the Golden Globes, or what the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, he seems pretty based. On the other hand, he is credibly accused of having sexually abused Brendan Fraser, the actor. The article accused BLM of carrying on Manson's mission to start a race war. Where's the lie, though? It also hit out at BLM co-founder Patrisse Cullors over her recent purchase of a $1.4 million home in Topanga Canyon, Los Angeles. Burke's email sparked a heated exchange with Chief Operating Officer Gregory Geckner, branding it deeply offensive, and member Rui Coimbra calling it racist. The scandal came just 4 years after Burke drew outrage from other Hollywood Foreign Press Association members over the release of his controversial memoir, Signs and Wonders. Yeah, I guess the Hollywood Foreign Press Association is pretty much told that you're not giving enough statuettes to Black people. So get moving on that right now. I'm looking at a picture of Patrisse Cullors, and she has weird, 818 seems to have been tattooed just above her breasts in the middle of her chest. I don't know what that means. If anyone has any ideas, let me know in the chat. Oh, Front Page Mag. Was this David Horowitz, I guess, had written this piece. The day after the Front Page Mag article was posted online, Colors released a statement on Instagram blasting a false and defamatory article circulating about her. There were several articles and news stories circulating at that point, so it's not clear what she was referring to. This effort to discredit and harass me and my family is not new, nor is it acceptable. It is taken away from where the focus should be, ending white supremacy. And how is that going to happen exactly? How is that going to happen? Speaking of insurrection, Julie Kelly, who's doing an outstanding job at American Greatness, has a piece there yesterday from insurrectionist to interruptionist. Well, this is a bummer for the sedition-baiting crowd. The Biden Justice Department last week announced its first plea deal related to the January 6th protest on Capitol Hill. John Ryan Schaefer pleaded guilty to 2 charges: obstruction of an official proceeding and entering the Capitol with a dangerous or deadly weapon. Schaefer, who has no criminal record, faced 6 counts of various trespassing and disorderly conduct offenses. He did not plead guilty to any of the initial charges. You know, in the United States today, it's typical for trespassing and disorderly conduct to simply be written off. You get a ticket and then nothing happens. But this was very different because it was an insurrection, unlike what's been going on in Portland for a whole year, which are protests. They're just protests, and we know that because journalists tell us so. Schaefer turned himself into law enforcement January 18th and has remained behind bars ever since. Like many Capitol defendants, Schaefer was transported to Washington, D.C. to await trial. His arrest was part of the shock and awe manhunt the Justice Department unleashed immediately following the unrest to deter people from protesting Joe Biden's inauguration. In an April 15th press release, the Justice Department patted itself on the back for a job well done. On this 100th day since the horrific January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol, Oath Keepers member John Schaefer has pleaded guilty to multiple felonies. Acting Deputy Attorney General John Carlin said in a statement. Carlin, a top deputy in the Obama Justice Department, worked for the same shop that prepared the bogus FISA application against Carter Page. An outspoken Trump critic and one-time chief of staff to ex-FBI Director Robert Mueller, Carlin clearly thrills at the idea of using his government authority against Americans on the right. In charging documents, a special agent discovered Schaefer had attended the Million MAGA March in Washington last November and even gave a media interview. Here's part of Schaefer's incriminating statement to the reporter a week after the election. We are not going to merge into some globalist communist system. There will be a lot of bloodshed if it comes down to that. Believe me, the American people will not go for that bullshit once they understand what is actually happening. Nobody wants this, but they're pushing us to a point where we have no choice. Yes, and in more insurrection news, a media hoax has been exposed, but don't expect any groveling apologies from the media. This is from the Washington Post. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who engaged rioters, suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes, officials say. The ruling, released Monday, will make it difficult for prosecutors to pursue homicide charges in the officer's death. Yes, I suppose it would. 2 men are accused of assaulting Sicknick by spraying a powerful chemical irritant at him during the siege, but prosecutors have not tied that exposure to Sicknick's death. In an interview with the Washington Post, Francisco J. Diaz, the medical examiner, said the autopsy found no evidence the 42-year-old officer suffered an allergic reaction to chemical irritants, which Diaz said would have caused Sicknick's throat to quickly seize. Diaz also said there was no evidence of internal or external injuries. Diaz said Sicknick suffered 2 strokes at the base of the brain stem caused by a clot in an artery that supplies blood to that area of the body. Diaz said he could not comment on whether Sicknick had a pre-existing medical condition, citing privacy laws. Well, we know from months back that his family believed that he had died of a stroke, so it would seem that the family was aware of his pre-existing medical condition. And Glenn Greenwald, who's just been on fire in the last few weeks, has some things to say about this. And I will just bring them up. Just look at this short excerpt of how we drowned in a totally false story for a full month, one that was crucial to the narrative because only Sicknick could be said to have been killed by deliberate violence by pro-Trump protesters. And Greenwald was there retweeting yesterday a tweet from February the 16th. He continues, the corporate media lies to you constantly because they only care about pleasing the political ideology and flattering the preconceptions of their audience. Substack and similar platforms allow truth to be aired, which is why they hate it. There is no such thing as a noble lie, especially in journalism. This particular fabrication made its way into the impeachment trial against Trump and out of Joe Biden's mouth. It was clear from the start it was highly dubious, but few journalists cared. It served their purpose. Yeah, it does serve their purpose. I would have to think there's rather a limit to this. If people come to the conclusion that the media is lying to you all the time, they'll simply stop paying attention. Nancy Pelosi thanks George Floyd for, quote, sacrificing his life for justice. So what is the media about? Well, we learned, a few days ago from The Guardian that apparently it's harassing people, doxing people, using stolen records for giving $5 or $10 to Kyle Rittenhouse. But wait, there's more. This is from Mediaite. One American News Network, the pro-Trump station that embraced conspiracy theories about the 2020 election, fired a producer that spilled to the New York Times about working there. One American News has fired Marty Gollingen, who told us staffers don't think many of OAN stories are true. I've given up my journalistic integrity already, and to be fired, that would make me feel good, he had told me. I would wear it like a badge of honor. The Times story interviewed 18 current and former employees of OAN that condemned the network's dedication to misinformation. I wonder how many New York Times employees could be interviewed about that newspaper's dedication to not just misinformation, but disinformation. And, okay, before I move on to the appalling or appealing, depending on taste, prospect of Queen Meghan Mertz, let's go to the chat. Ultra Testosterone says, I think Russia and China are going to roll over the United States over the next few years. Well, I hope we don't get to see that. I really hope we don't. The Biden administration seems to be hell-bent on a war with Russia over the Ukraine. Brent Studemeyer says, very true about upper middle class being the worst virtue signalers. Drive around the wealthiest suburbs of Boston and you'll constantly be seeing BLM signs. You know, last year in Victoria, which is, I don't know, the leftist city in Canada, I saw an awful lot of BLM signs. I'm not seeing them anymore. Nope. We had marches too in favor of BLM. But haven't been any marches lately. Palpicasso 88 says Lena Dunham beat a trespassing charge. She accidentally locked herself in a Krispy Kreme overnight. Hilarity ensued. It's funny, you know, I was thinking there's all this press coverage of this woman called Demi Lovato, who I know who she is. You know, I've heard of her for a decade or whatever. But she has a new record out, and apparently it's all about her addiction and the devil or something like that. And she's giving all these interviews about how she's California sober. And California sober apparently means that she gets high and gets drunk, but not to excess. And I'm thinking, is Demi Lovato famous now because she's a singer? Or is she famous now because she's a drug-addicted fat woman? In the same way, is Lena Dunham famous because she is an actor or producer? Or is she famous simply because she is fat? I mean, people can be that now. They can be famous for being fat. Oh, Chokin 666, Patrice Lumumba galores. I like that. That's a good one. Takes me back. During the scuffle in the Congo, after it got its independence from Belgium, the UN appointed a journalist called Connor Cruz O'Brien in favor of its military forces. That did not turn out very well. Connor Cruz O'Brien. Chad Hudson says, my girlfriend is from Russia. She couldn't stomach the thought of moving back to Siberia a year ago. Now we both thank her for being with her family is a good idea. A question to me, is it a question to me from UT? Are you seeing any whites standing up against this stuff as a group in the real world? I don't know. Tucker Carlson, I suppose. He's a pretty big audience. An absolutely hilarious story from Vanity Fair called The Royal Family's Continental Rift by Michelle Ruiz. Two brothers, alike in dignity, among the British monarchy where we lay our scene. What? I'm going to read that again. Two brothers, alike in dignity, among the British monarchy where we lay our scene. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Are grappling with ancient grudges. They're not ancient grudges. Will it? Should it be mended? Ooh, I can hardly wait. So is the idea that the American people are going to warm to the British monarchy if a Yank is in charge of it? I don't think there's no question in my mind that Meghan Mertz, the Duchess of Sussex, well, at least for now, wants to be the Queen. Now, failing that, she'll settle for a few $100 million from Netflix and the like. But I mean, lots of people are on Netflix, and there is only one Queen of Great Britain. Before she was Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle referred to herself as Rango's mermaid. The phrase comes from French-Cuban writer Anais Nin's autobiographical novel, The Four-Chambered Heart, which Meghan quoted often in her Suits era. "I must be a mermaid, Rango. I have no fear of depths and a great fear of shallow living." On the one hand, I don't think that Meghan Mertz is a book reader, but Anais Nin, have you ever come across this woman's work? It is just ghastly in its pretentiousness and in just crummy writing quality. Meghan wanted more than middling cable TV success. Elizabeth Tuke, her publicist from 2014 to 2016, encouraged her to go out for blockbusters. "You could be the next Megan Fox," Tuke told her. What an aspiration. Instead, she embarked on a USO tour to Afghanistan, Spain, Italy, Turkey, and England, traveled to Rwanda to build wells for clean water, and campaigned against menstrual poverty among schoolgirls in India. She is a super ambitious woman, Tuke added, which shouldn't be a dirty word. Meghan did press Q&As in her car on the way to set at 4 in the morning. Oh, a living saint. And affirmed her respect for Tuke's role in the written agreement with language that declared Meghan would never minimize me as a person or my prowess in a field. Is this writer kidding? You spend 10 minutes looking up Meghan Mertz on the internet, and you find out that this woman cannot keep staff. She cannot keep staff, and she cannot keep friends. She doesn't have friends. There are just people who can be useful to her. Okay. Oh, made the same qualities that made Meghan a superstar. No, that's not how it works. And these constant comparisons to the Princess of Wales are inapt, because the Princess of Wales truly did dazzle the world. It wasn't simply that she had married into the royal family. Meghan Mertz, no. But what this article is saying, oh, like Diana in her day, Harry and Meghan were suddenly too electric, says Anna Pasternak, author of The Real Wallace Simpson, A New History of the American Divorcee Who Became the Duchess of Windsor. They made the Cambridges, Bill and Kathy, goes the joke, seem dowdy, suburban, and rather dull. That does not go down well in the palace. I wonder why. For continuity's sake, the House of Windsor prefers to train the spotlight on the monarch and her direct heirs. How about that? Hence the 2019 Christmas portrait in which only the Queen, Prince Charles, Prince William, and Prince George made a performative pudding. 3 decades later, Meghan was staring down the paradox that had plagued her mother-in-law, a mother-in-law who was never her mother-in-law. The royal family demands duty from the women who marry in to relinquish normal life and their passports, according to Meghan. Haha, good one. Yeah, how about that baby shower you went to in New York City? That cost $150,000. I think you need a passport for that. In service of the crown, but if they're too sparkly, the palace, like a sullen teen, gets jealous and resentful. This piece is published just after the death of Prince Philip, who never was king. He was the consort, and he devoted more than half a century on behalf of his adopted country of Britain, and his children didn't even get to have his name. But apparently this has never occurred to the writer of this piece. Let's see. You're either too much or never enough when Meghan and Harry announced their decision to step back as senior royals last year. Did they ever think that was actually going to fly? The fusty palace establishment started to push Meghan and Harry away completely. Diane Abbott, the first black female member of Parliament and former Shadow Home Secretary, called Vanity Fair. Was Diane Abbott really the first black female member of Parliament? Yeah, that's what, when I want some insight about what's going on in Britain. I'm going to go to Diane Abbott. She was one of four. Yeah, okay, so technically it's correct. But instead of protecting the monarchy, the firm's alleged unsupportive treatment of the Sussexes has only lurched the institution into existential crisis, fueling questions about its colonial roots and Britain's systemically racist president. The Queen is a figurehead for an empire that refuses to understand that its days are gone, says Kalechi Okafor. Oh, its days are gone? Then why aren't you gone? If you hate England and the royal family so much. But this article goes on. It's very long, and I'm not going to read any more of it. That Prince Charles is going to be pushed out of the way. He's now 72 years old. And we'll get the dull ones instead. We'll get the Cambridges instead of the Sussexes. I don't know whether that's going to happen, but if this writer Ruiz had paid any attention, just say to the popular press in England, she would have found that Meghan Mertz is despised. And most people in England don't believe that she has been punished enough. Diane Abbott is hideous, says Popcasso88. She is indeed. And Jeremy Corbyn, who was formerly the leader of the Labour Party, had an affair with her and used to pass around naked pictures that he had taken of her to other MPs. No, please stop. The goggles do nothing. Neil Terry says, as bad as things are, despair is always a tool of the enemy. Quite true. Dum spiro spero, as I say. While there is breath, there is hope. And, yes, I saw this at Crazy Days and Nights, and I thought, no, can't be true. Even that ginger waster, Prince Harry, would not be capable of this. He said that, or Crazy Days and Nights said that Prince Harry had adjusted his IMDb account, Internet Movie Database account, to add his attendance at the funeral of Prince Philip. Yeah. So I thought, nah, because there's a lot of stuff in CDAN that's just wrong. And I looked it up, and there it is. It says Prince Philip, a royal funeral TV special. And Prince Harry played the part of himself in 2021. He was on Sky Midnight News and Sky World News, as if, I don't know, is he looking for an acting career? Okay. Let's talk about permanent mask mandates, because I know that's what you all want to hear, right? This is from William Briggs, wmbriggs.com. Highly recommend it. He's the statistician to the stars. Vatican catches a cold, so the Vatican is holding a health conference promoting it using an image like the one in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel where God gives life to man. Only this time God has on a glove, and so does man, lest either man catch God's cooties or what man gives his to God's. It's not clear. Oh my God, it's true. Yes, there is the famous Michelangelo image, and they're wearing surgical gloves. Because of course they would. Because you have to fear God, because he might give you COVID-19. All the best people will be coming. It's called Exploring the Mind, Body, and Soul. Unite to prevent, unite to cure. Deepak Chopra, who will try to quantum heal the corona doom by putting sick people into Schrödinger boxes in which they're both cured and dead simultaneously. Chelsea Clinton, yes, that Chelsea Clinton will deliver the talk. If you abort your baby, it can't catch a disease. Cindy Crawford, the model, will be there. Joe Perry from Aerosmith's talk is titled The Best Guitar Picks for Use in a Pandemic. I think he's making that one up. Oligarchs like John Scully have been tapped to push their latest investments. CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, is coming. The CEOs of Moderna and Pfizer will be there giving the joint talk. Blood clots? What blood clots? Finally, the fabulous Fauci will come. He will decide on what he will say after hearing what he thinks the other speakers want to hear. Briggs comments, if my reading of history is right, the deeper meaning of human existence is something the Vatican figured out a couple of thousand years ago. Nothing about panicking over diseases in that deeper meaning, but things change, which is probably why they don't mention the name of our Lord in any of the material of this conference. If one were a conspiracy theorist, one would say this has all the markings of our New World Order promised by so many. From Associated Press, some residents are fuming as Oregon considers a permanent mask mandate, even as some states loosen coronavirus restrictions. A top health official is considering indefinitely extending rules requiring masks and social distancing in all businesses in the state. Top health official, an expert credentialed in expertology, which guarantees his opinion is correct and true and, of course, unquestionable, lest one become a denier of the science. Longtime readers will recall how we joked over a year ago they'd never ask for mask mandates and lockdowns for flu. Boy, was that funny. Gretchen, I cannot be wrong, Whitmer, is doing the same for Michigan. Michigan moving to make emergency COVID-19 mandates permanent. Does Gretchen Whitmer, with her strangely waxy face, does she understand how many people are going to be leaving Michigan because of this? You know, if the mask mandates were universal, I guess you'd be stuck wherever you are. But since they are not, people are free to vote with their feet. State bureaucrats are moving to impose permanent regulations that would mandate the following and more on all Michigan businesses: mask wearing whenever employees are within 6 feet of someone else, daily health screening, extensive record keeping, and keeping a COVID-19 safety coordinator on site. Retail stores, personal care services, and other businesses open to the public would have to become the mask police. They would be required to make all customers wear masks, vaccinated or not. What makes this story even more horrible is that some organizations have sued Whitmer over her against all evidence rules and won, but she ignores the courts. The Mackinac Center Legal Foundation filed a lawsuit on behalf of 3 medical providers who had been shut down and a patient who had been denied care, and the Michigan Supreme Court eventually ruled that the governor had acted illegally and could not extend these emergency orders indefinitely. Whitmer, nevertheless, maintained unilateral control. Yes, I've seen this tweet before from Nick Knudsen. Who is this fellow when he is at home? Oh, he's the executive director of Demcast USA. I don't know what that is. Formerly editor-in-chief, Dem Right Pressed. Okay. But retweet if you're partially or fully vaccinated, but you're still wearing a mask to help protect your community. Wear a mask. Yes, it's all about caring and, well, suffocating a little. Briggs comments, tell somebody in the cult of the mask of Florida, Texas, or Sweden, and they will not hear you. I don't mean they ignore you, pretending not to have heard. I mean they do not hear. What you are telling them is so foreign they cannot assimilate it. They always answer, put on your mask. Police can arrest you now for being outside your home. That's my province, not my province. I was born there, but I haven't lived there since I was a child, of Ontario, where police can arrest you now for being outside your home, healthy, but without an essential reason. As I said earlier, the only thing left is to shoot people in the head and prevent them from dying of corona doom. And wow, the numbers look good all over the place. Certainly in California, but you just got to keep it going, keep the lockdown going, keep hope alive, or I suppose more to the point, keep panic alive. Because where would we be without panic? In further Gretchen Whitmer news, it was revealed about a week ago that 2 members of her staff had violated her own orders and left Michigan. And I'm looking at a screen cap here, Gretchen Whitmer, with once again her strangely waxen, greasy face and a just total uncanny valley expression on her face. Gretchen Whitmer is so busted, says the Citizen Free Press. Michigan Republicans blasted the governor for the trip to Florida during the pandemic. Yes, how about that? She had derided the reports on her staffers as partisan attacks. I'm not going to get distracted by partisan hit jobs on my team. So what directors do on their personal time is their business, so long as they are safe, which is what we're asking everyone in the state to do. Well, apparently Gretchen's employees have personal time where they can do what they like, but the rest of the people of Michigan do not, because they are unimportant. They are plebs. From the Daily Mail, just 14 people under the age of 20 have died of COVID in 2021 in England and Wales, as data shows that fatalities from the virus are now in single figures in every region. Nearly 60% of all the 57,000 COVID deaths that have occurred in 2021 were to people aged 80 and over. Yeah, we knew all that at the time, right from the very beginning, but apparently it wasn't supposed to make any difference. There's an excellent site called conservativewoman.co.uk. I've quoted from a lot of essays on it. And here's one from yesterday by Dr. Sinead Murphy. How long before we don't know how to be virtuous? On Tuesday, March 30th, the leaders of 23 countries, including the UK, France, and Germany, issued a statement on the matter of pandemic preparedness. Its key phrase was reprinted across the media: nobody is safe until everyone is safe. As we embark on our second COVID year, the sentiment is chilling. Nobody is safe until everyone is safe is the latest phase in the capture of virtue that has been the most profound effect of COVID. At first, we were asked to keep our distance. Other people, for whose sake we do most of the good things we do, were put beyond our reach. We no longer held the door for the next person to pass through. We no longer offered to carry an old lady shopping. We stopped shaking each other's hands and patting each other in the back. We no longer hugged. Almost all of the ways in which we knew how to be good to each other were paused. The bonds of mutual support were severed. This is the COVID zero mantra. No one is safe until everyone is safe. Well, that means no one is safe, ever. That simple. In the same way people talk about, oh, there has to be justice for all and there's justice for none. Well, I guess there is justice for none then. And this is the same sort of idiocy that leads people to say, well, I don't think it's right for me to enjoy myself. There are people in the world suffering. There are always people in the world suffering. That is the nature of the world. Hang on just a second. Michael, directly outside, revving pointlessly. Anyway, back to Dr. Murphy. Then, for the first time uncertain about how to do good, we were asked to mask up, not for our own sake, for the sake of the other person. I mask for you, you mask for me. Being good to other people was returned to us, but it was not quite like it had been before. Other people, still at a distance, were also without faces, and faces are so important in arousing our pity, requesting our assistance, eliciting our smile. Virtue had been readmitted, but for the sake of anonymous beings. Then, still at a distance, still masked up, we were encouraged to take the jab. Not for our own sake, at least not directly, for the sake of the herd, for herd immunity. This concept, so energetically rejected as cruel during the first months of COVID, was returned to us. But it was not quite like how it had been before. It was cleansed of its natural components, redefined by the World Health Organization as an achievement of vaccination, its taint of let it rip, buried under a great enthusiasm for pharmaceutical engineering. Herd immunity was back, and virtue was redirected towards an anonymous crowd. And now we are told that nobody is safe until everyone is safe. Now, are we to be good, not even to a masked and distanced other, not even to an anonymous herd, but to everyone? Everyone? All 7 billion inhabitants of the earth? It's worse than that. The statement issued by world leaders March 30th champions a concept of one health, which is described as encompassing humans, animals, and our planet. It reminds me of the famous line from Beyond the Fringe, one of the first products of the satire boom in early 60s England, where Peter Cook is being interviewed, within this review. And he says, "I intend to specialize in the universe and all that surrounds it." Yeah, humans, animals, and our planet. Dr. Murphy continues, "How in the world is any of us to act for the good of this everyone? The idea is sublime. It may strike us with awe, even admiration, but there is nothing we can do for its sake. Our good deeds, already scrambled by distancing and masking and herding, are now at last put out of play. 1 year ago, we were tempted from the well-trodden paths of virtue onto a seemingly higher road emblazoned with slogans of sacrifice, decorated with rainbows and resounding with the clapping of people pulling together. But the road leads nowhere. It is a dead end. In January, in the northern snow, I was saying hello to my neighbor over the low garden wall. So that she could find her key, she placed her little girl, 10 months and all wrapped up in her snowsuit, onto the soft ground while my neighbor was searching in her bag. Her baby slowly keeled over. Without thinking, I stepped across and leaned down to lift her, but it was the wrong thing to do. Her mother snatched her up, and I retreated in vague apology. What is now the right thing to do when a small baby falls sideways onto the snow? The answer, nothing. Virtue is canceled, or rather it is redirected through an idea so sublime that nothing follows from it for mere humans with their merely human faculties. Everyone means nothing to us. For the sake of everyone, we can do nothing. But there's a problem about doing nothing, because it may just be that human beings are good only insofar as they do good things. Virtue requires practice and wastes away from lack of practice. It's more like playing the piano than riding a bike. You have to keep it up or you can no longer really do it. How long before our good natures grow rusty and flake away? How long before we no longer know how to be virtuous? Which is why I presume we now have these badges of virtue, masks, certificates. Our enthusiasm for both may have little to do with their dubious efficacy in stopping the spread of a respiratory virus, and much to do with our need for reassurance that even though we no longer do good things, we still really are good people. And again, it's a fine essay from Dr. Sinead Murphy at the site conservativewoman.co.uk. Oh, and you know what else? You can't enjoy the pretty flowers anymore because pretty flowers are dangerous. For the second year in a row, Torontonians have been warned off admiring the blossoming of the cherry blossom trees in High Park in Toronto because nature is bad for us. Doesn't everyone know this? This is from the Associated Press. Raf Cassert, pandemic puts tulips, bluebells, cherry blossoms in hiding. They're not in hiding, you maniac. Dateline, Halle, Belgium. There is no stopping flowers when they bloom, blossoms when they burst. Unfortunately, people have been stopped from enjoying them these days. In pandemic times, when so much goes against the grain, some beauties of nature are no longer embraced, but kept at bay. By whom, one wonders. From Japan's cherry blossom trees to the endless Keukenhof tulip fields in the Netherlands, to the riot of purple bluebells in the Hallerbos south of Brussels, everything looks its best this spring when conditions are at its worst. The flowers are there. Nature refuses to be stopped by anyone, says Halle Mayor Mark Schnuck, who for the second year in a row needs to keep people away from the municipality's famed woods instead of inviting them in. Why? Why does he need to keep people away from the municipality's famed woods? Because all across the world, authorities are seeking to stave off a blah, blah, blah. Crowds are anathema to health. Yes, fresh air, sunlight, bad for you. Better to stay indoors, close to other people. The weather is great and there's beauty to enjoy, Schnuck said, but on the other hand, we have to watch it. Safety trumps everything. No, it does not. Because if safety trumped everything, we would never leave our homes. And even though it is good to enjoy this nice time and the beauty of the purple bluebells, we absolutely don't want anyone to get sick. Since it is an open forest, a full ban is out of the question, so Schnuck has canceled special bus shuttles and issued parking bans to discourage people from coming. So the question is, was this municipal official, was he always a creep? Or was it only the COVID-19 panic which allowed him to fully embrace his dickishness? That's one for the ages, certainly. And, let's go to lockdown skeptics here. And just 32 people in hospital with COVID after vaccination. Well, so all the lockdowns, masks and all that's going to end, right? Isn't it? If not, why not? Mass COVID testing, a waste of time and money, MPs told. Biostatistics professor John Deeks has criticized the English government's mass COVID testing plan as a waste of time and money, highlighting that in some areas only one positive case has been found after 10,000 tests. Professor Deeks, a senior researcher at the Institute of Applied Health Research at Birmingham University, told the all-party parliamentary group on coronavirus that there is no evidence to show mass testing works. How about that? For this mass test, the Innova test, we have the Liverpool study and the University of Birmingham study. That's a total of 78 cases where we know how well that it detects positive cases. That is absolutely outrageous that we are now testing the whole population based effectively on data from 78 people, which actually showed it doesn't work very well. In the Southwest at the moment, I think we are down to 0.09 prevalence, and that probably means we'll be using 10,000 tests to find one case in the next few weeks. Well, you can never be too safe. Safety trumps everything. Civil service job advert confirms COVID passports are in development. Warning about blood clots should be added to labels for Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine, says EU's medicines regulator. Ministers caused confusion by not differentiating between lockdown guidance and the law, police watchdog says. More than 810,000 UK workers have lost jobs since March 2020. People don't need jobs. The government can just create money and helicopter it to us. You can catch COVID twice, but it's very rare and very mild. The challenge trials at Oxford University have now turned their attention to this question, deliberately exposing people who have had the disease before to the virus again to see how their immune systems responded. Other studies have already looked into this question, though without the controversial deliberate exposure aspect. The most recent, published in The Lancet last week, tested around 3,000 U.S. Marine recruits aged 18 to 20 for COVID antibodies, and then followed them over 6 weeks while they completed basic training together to see how many became infected. The living in close quarters would likely have ensured that all were exposed to the virus. The study found that about 10% of seropositive, that is with antibodies participants, 19 out of 189, tested PCR positive for the virus versus around 50% of seronegative participants. This means that having antibodies from a previous infection gives about 80% protection from testing positive for the virus again. The new study was being used last week to promote the idea of vaccinating young people who had previously been infected on the grounds that protection via infection was not enough. What such claims appear not to allow for is that questions are being asked how the balance of risks stacks up for young people to be vaccinated, even when they have not had COVID, let alone when they have 80% protection already. To this balance must be added that severe side effects are considerably more common in those who have previously had COVID. That's the real question. Okay, so the vaccine has, efficacy. It also has risks. But does the efficacy of any of these viruses, does it overmatch the risks, especially when we're dealing with people who do not get COVID, or if they get COVID, show no symptoms or very mild symptoms? And that's not a question. that I see being entertained because, we can never be too safe. But if viruses are sickening people, then that would seem to mitigate against safety, at least for some. And let's wrap this up, COVID-19, with, as always, Alex Berenson. Here's a scary story from Reuters. Reactivation of herpes zoster, not genital herpes, has been a rare side effect for some who received the COVID-19 vaccine, medical experts say. Herpes zoster, more commonly known as shingles, which I understand is a horrific disease to suffer from, should not be confused with genital herpes, which is an entirely different virus. Berenson comments, gee, I wonder why this is a story all of a sudden. Love the it's just shingles and not the herp defense, as if shingles is not so painful and ugly that, yep, we have a vaccine for it. A vaccine with what were considered severe side effects until the mRNAs came along. Meanwhile, India is having its own bout of COVID vaccine hesitancy after a well-known actor died less than a day after very publicly getting jabbed. Not to worry, though. The authorities are certain his death is unrelated. How do you spell coincidence in Hindi? Oh, yes. Alex Berenson wrote a book arguing very strongly and persuasively, to me at least, against marijuana usage, particularly amongst the young, and particularly the more recent, more powerful forms of marijuana, high THC, edibles, and the like, which induce psychosis. Lamb Goat had asked him, are you seriously suggesting that marijuana is more dangerous than alcohol? He responded, more psychiatrically dangerous, no question, and overall more highly correlated with violence, a lot of it mediated through psychosis. I wrote a book about it. You learn something if you read it, though I doubt you will. Oh, let's see. What are a small price to pay? Oh, yes, it's 420 today now, the juvenile celebration of marijuana. Mother unraveled in depression, QAnon-style conspiracies, and months before she killed 3 kids. Guess what? Marijuana. Yes, they are a small price to pay, someone says to Berenson, for the massive benefits of cannabis legalization. If you highlighted the benefits, they'd vastly overshadow the negative anecdotes you've chosen to focus on. Oh, we're not interested in anecdotes anymore, are we? Berenson comments, can't make an omelet without a few dead kids. Someone actually said it. Impressive commitment to the cause, commitment being the operative word. Well, before I read Berenson's book, Tell Your Children, it's called, I had noticed anecdotally, observations over decades, just looking at people that I knew who smoked marijuana, or reading about others, people that I don't know personally who smoke marijuana. I came to the conclusion that it is absolute poison to people with depressive personalities. And a lot of people have depressive personalities these days. So let me go back to the chat. Greg Gutless says, my trail of disgrace. Even if you thought that it would be better that Chauvin be convicted, even if he were not guilty, even if you thought it, the fact that he would actually say it is somewhat remarkable to me. Because what you are saying is the mob must be appeased. Justice go hang, the mob must be appeased. Terrace Feral Hog says, speaking of crummy writing, I've got a couple of short stories and a novel that I want to write. Okay. Auditory ephemera I actually heard from youths on the train. What is that? I don't know what that means. British American says KMG has his pre-cameras edge. I don't know if that's spelled correctly. I'm a little confused by this. Gerard Depardieu says the media largely determines the outcome of highly controversial cases, especially involving race. I think that is largely true. I think that is largely true. Again, from GD, jurors knew their physical safety was at risk if they came to an honest conclusion, predictable outcome. A shopping cart. There's a video we went viral about some white man makes a habit of this sort of thing. So these people, they park as far away from the stores as they can, so they'll be, first out of the parking lot. They won't have to negotiate that. But that means that you're supposed to take your cart all the way back to the store, and a lot of people don't. So he harassed this woman, this white woman, and I don't know. I saw some comments saying this guy was a jerk. On the other hand, she should have taken the shopping cart back. Sometimes those things are on a rise. Something happens, something moves. They just start moving. They flow into the traffic, or they knock over some kid. Okay. What else do we have here? GC Stell says psychosis issues with marijuana and use 15 and younger was known for some time. I tell you, when I was in 10th grade, I was in some class, some acting class or something, where there were some older students, and there was some students I was friendly with that were in the 12th grade. And this fellow that I knew named Lloyd, he told me that he used to smoke marijuana and he stopped. And I was curious, and I asked him why. And he said, because I couldn't shake this feeling of worthlessness, that everyone in the world was looking at me and letting me know silently that they thought that I was useless, that they hated me, that I was ugly or stupid or whatever. And I've heard a great many stories of that sort since that time. Goethe said, know myself. If I knew myself, I'd run away. It is not a good idea as a general principle to spend a lot of time thinking about what the world thinks of you. Now, you can think about, your actions, whether they're just or moral, but people's opinions, you cannot control people's opinions. And frankly, you do not want to know what other people think of you, because you go through life and someone smiles at you and says hello, and you think that person likes me. And then you might overhear from someone else, no, that person actually hates your guts. Why? Sometimes they just don't like the cut of your jib, Okay. Ogan's Iron says the KMG in Africa, criminals take cannabis before crimes, makes them more violent, more mellow. Well, it's the set and setting that Timothy Leary talked about, this useful concept that he came up with. People use a caffeine, as in tea. They use it to sharpen themselves up, and they use it to relax. You have a similar use with alcohol. You have a similar use with tobacco. And I suppose with most white people, smoking marijuana makes them, what's the phrase? Melt into the furniture. But it's like, people take these drugs like Ambien, and you're supposed to surrender to the drug. If you don't surrender to the drug, then you get the opposite effect. And the same is true with marijuana. Yeah, I'm thinking of Rastafarians, they smoke astonishing amounts of marijuana, and their eyes are totally red, but they say it revs them up just so they become like berserkers. GC Style says people's opinions ruled my life for some time. Tough, shake it off. Oh, the most miserable way to live is smoking high-potency weed daily, says Texas Feral Hog. Yeah, I noticed from an early age that, alcohol makes people stupid in large enough amounts, but it doesn't seem to take all that much marijuana to make people stupid. That their memories, just are shot. That, they forget the names of everything, or forget things that they have done, or forget things that other people have done that they should know very well. You know, my foster brother got high as a teenager, and then he'd hear some piece of music playing in my room, and he'd say, "What's that? What are you asking me again? What this is called?" How many times do I have to tell you? And years later, when I was working for a magazine, the people working on a sister magazine in Vancouver, the chief of production would call up and ask me a question. For instance, is this ready yet? Or are you going to do that? And I'd say no. And she'd call up 20 or 30 minutes later and ask me the exact same question. No, the answer is the same as it was previously. Oh, you don't have to get like that. And sometime after I stopped doing that job, I asked someone who'd worked in Vancouver, why is it always a shambles in the Vancouver office over the weekend? Because they start smoking marijuana on Thursday evening and they don't stop until they've finished laying out the magazine. Oh, well, that makes sense. Polygon says, my gym has begun to reek of the cannabinoid menace. It is a nasty smell. Isaiah Selassie says Rastafarians commit zero crime. Okay. Whether it's THC or nicotine or glue or gasoline or meth, says Brandon Smith. Funny the conflicts that erupt between inhalant junkies. You know, one thing that I have learned is that you might never see a person using drugs, shooting up, or any of that stuff. Some people keep it pretty well hidden. But there's a giveaway that they're always talking about drugs. And they're always looking like to justify their own use of heroin or cocaine or whatever by saying, coffee's a drug, you know. Tea is a drug. Chocolate is a drug. Yeah, okay, fine. Sure it is. Sure it is. Okay. Let's talk about Hilaire Belloc and the Servile State. It must be remembered that the servile condition remains as truly an institution of the state when it attaches permanently and irrevocably at any one time to a particular set of human beings as when it attaches to a particular class throughout their lives. Thus, the laws of paganism permitted the slave to be enfranchised by his master. It further permitted children or prisoners to be sold into slavery. The servile institution, though perpetually changing in the elements of its composition, was still an unchanging factor in the state. Similarly, though the state should only subject to slavery those who had less than a certain income, while leaving men free by inheritance or otherwise to pass out of or to pass by loss into the slave class, that slave class, though fluctuating as to its composition, would still permanently exist. Thus, if the modern industrial state shall make a law by which servile conditions shall not attach to those capable of earning more than a certain sum by their own labor, but shall attach to those who earn less than this sum, or if the modern industrial state defines manual labor in a particular fashion, renders it compulsory during a fixed time for those who undertake it, but leaves them free to turn later to other occupations if they choose. Undoubtedly, such distinctions, though they attach to conditions and not to individuals, establish the servile institution. Some considerable number must be manual workers by definition, and while they were so defined, would be slaves. Here again, the composition of the servile class would fluctuate, but the class would be permanent and large enough to stamp all society. I need not insist upon the practical effect that such a class, once established, tends to be fixed in the great majority of those which make it up, and that the individuals entering or leave it tend to become few compared to the whole mass. There is one last point to be considered in this definition. It is this: since in the nature of things, a free society must enforce a contract, a free society consisting in nothing else but the enforcement of free contracts, how far can that be called a servile condition, which is the result of a contract nominally or really free? In other words, is not a contract to labor freely entered into servile of its nature when enforced by the state? For instance, I have no food or clothing, nor do I possess the means of production whereby I can produce any wealth in exchange for such. I am so circumstanced that an owner of the means of production will not allow me access to those means unless I sign a contract to serve him for a week at a wage of bare subsistence. Does the state, in enforcing that contract, make me for that week a slave? Obviously not. For the institution of slavery presupposes a certain attitude of mind in the free man and in the slave, a habit of living in either, and the stamp of both of those habits upon society. No such effects are produced by a contract enforceable by the length of 1 week. The duration of human life is such, and the prospect of posterity, that the fulfilling of such a contract in no way wounds the senses of liberty and of choice. What of a month, a year, 10 years, a lifetime? Suppose an extreme case and a destitute man to sign a contract binding him and all his children who were minors to work for a bare subsistence until his own death or the attainment of majority of the children, whichever event might happen latest. Would the state enforcing that contract be making a man a slave? As undoubtedly it would not be making him a slave in the first case, it would be making him a slave in the second. One can only say to ancient sophistical difficulties of this kind that the sense of man establishes for itself the true limits of any object as of freedom. What freedom is or is not, insofar as mere measure of time is concerned, though of course much else than time enters in, human habit determines. But the enforcing of a contract of service, certainly or probably leaving a choice after its expiration, is consonant with freedom. The enforcement of a contract, probably binding one's whole life, is not consonant with freedom. One binding to service a man's natural heirs is intolerable to freedom. Consider another converse point. A man binds himself to work for life and his children after him so far as the law may permit him to bind them in a particular society, but that not for a bare subsistence, but for so large a wage that he will be wealthy in a few years, and his posterity, when the contract is completed, wealthier still. Does the state, enforcing such a contract, make the fortunate employee a slave? No. For it is in the essence of slavery that subsistence, or little more than subsistence, should be guaranteed to the slave. Slavery exists in order that the free should benefit by its existence, and connotes a condition in which the men subjected to it may demand secure existence, but a little more. If anyone were to draw an exact line and to say that a life contract enforceable by law was slavery at so many shillings a week, but cease to be slavery after that margin, his effort would be folly. Nonetheless, there is a standard of subsistence in any one society, the guarantee of which, or little more, under an obligation to labor by compulsion is slavery, while the guarantee of very much more is not slavery. This verbal jugglery could be continued. It is a type of verbal difficulty apparent in every inquiry open to the professional disputant, but of no effect upon the mind of the honest inquirer, whose business is not dialectic, but truth. It is always possible, by establishing a cross-section in a set of definitions, to pose the unanswerable difficulty of degree, but that will never affect the realities of discussion. We know, for instance, what is meant by torture when it exists in a code of law and when it is forbidden. No imaginary difficulties of degree between pulling a man's hair and scalping him, between warming him and burning him alive, will disturb a reformer whose business it is to expunge torture from the penal code. Yes, and we saw that after 9/11 with the extraordinary renditions. No. These are intensive interrogation techniques, not torture. We don't engage in torture because torture is wicked. Back to Belloc. In the same way, we know what is and what is not compulsory labor, what is and what is not the servile condition. Its test is, I repeat, the withdrawal from a man of his free choice to labor or not to labor here or there for such and such an object, and the compelling of him by positive law to labor for the advantages of others who do not fall under the same compulsion. Where you have that, you have slavery, with all the manifold spiritual and political results of that ancient institution. Where you have slavery affecting a class of such considerable size as to mark and determine the character of the state, there you have the servile state. And I'll have more on this subject tomorrow. But let's talk about George W. Bush, who is back in the news for some reason. I guess it's that strange new respect that Joe Sobran and Tom Bethel talked about. He's not Trump. Yeah, weren't you kind of all really upset, put out by how embarrassed you were when you all took up the cause of the invasion of Iraq, dear journalists, were you not? And all sorts of other things. I remember you were calling him Bush Hitler. Yeah, you're comparing him to Hitler. Even before Trump was compared to Hitler. But it's all different now. This is from Shandalis, the Duster at CNN. Former President George W. Bush Tuesday described the Republican Party as, quote, isolationist, protectionist, and to a certain extent, nativist, unquote. His strongest and most direct criticism yet against his own party since leaving office in 2009. Oh, yes, isolationist, protectionist, to a certain extent, nativist. So that would seem that the neoconservative or neoliberal goal of, invade the world, invite the world, immiserate the world. Apparently, there are people that have the effrontery to reject those nostrums. Bush's comments are notable not only because he's a former Republican president, but he has largely kept quiet on politics since he left Washington. He has recently written about the need for a gentler approach to immigration, in contrast to much of the hardline rhetoric that dominates the current GOP in the post-Trump era. Hardline rhetoric, even like calling the president of the United States Hitler repeatedly, calling the GOP the Nazis repeatedly. Well, that's not hardline rhetoric. That is just the truth, baby. Asked on Tuesday how he would describe the Republican Party as he sees it today, Bush told NBC's Hota Kateb on Today, I would describe it as isolationist, protectionist, and to a certain extent, nativist. Well, was he disappointed? It's not exactly my vision, but I'm just an old guy they put out to pasture. Asked if a Republican who speaks warmly about immigration, favors gun control, and supports a strong government presence in education would have a chance for the Republican presidential nomination in 2024, Bush replied, I think so. I think it depends upon the emphasis. I think if the emphasis is integrity and decency and trying to work to get problems solved, I think the person has a shot, yeah. Objecting to Kateb's premise that such a candidate would be pro-immigration, I think pro-immigration isn't the right way to put it, Bush says. I think border enforcement with a compassionate touch. We're throwing you out of the country, but we're doing it with love. Is that what he means? That's how I would put it. That's what immigration basically means. Let's open the borders. George W. Bush, quote, that's what immigration basically means. Let's open the borders. Bush, who has recently made several media appearances to promote his book of paintings of immigrants, really has called on Congress to tone down the harsh rhetoric on immigration and advocated last week for a bipartisan approach to immigration legislation. Yes, a bipartisan approach. Was it Sam Francis made the joke about the stupid party and the evil party, and when they work together to do something both stupid and evil, it's called bipartisanship. Biden administration bans use of the term illegal alien. The words we use matter. Yeah, okay. So let's not use the words that describe what these people are. This is from the Washington Times. Memos issued by Customs and Border Protection, as well as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, recommend that agents use the words non-citizen or migrant. Well, that won't do. There are plenty of people in the United States who are non-citizens who are not illegal aliens. People on H-1B visas. People who are vacationing, students, etc., etc. So no, it's not merely a question of niceness. It's a question of precision. There is a piece in Chronicles magazine. I suppose it's their cover story, most recent cover story by Stephen Baskerville. It's a very long piece. The coming counter coup against the GOP. The left's new monopoly cannot be resisted without breaking free of ossified conservatism. Here are 3 areas of reform. How about just conservatism? Because conservatism is ossified by its nature, and it became surplus to requirements in 1991 when the Soviet Union was dissolved. Baskerville writes, conservative leaders effectively ceded power to a leftist coup of largely adolescent activists. These leaders had already forfeited the moral high ground, which they could have occupied by championing a few key issues of critical importance to ordinary Americans. They had a golden opportunity through President Donald Trump, who was defiant toward the established political class in Washington and open to confronting what was previously off limits. Instead, they colluded with leftists to conceal government's most hideous injustices. These professional conservatives in Washington have long displayed contempt for ordinary people. They have refused to examine their own repeated failures, stubbornly adhered to cliched free market dogmas, obsessed over building their personal political empires, and ruthlessly silenced criticism. Official conservatism is as culpable of practicing its own version of cancel culture as the left. He talks about radical sexuality, undeniably on the cutting edge of today's left. Yet on no subject are public debates more misinformed, evasive, or dishonest on both sides of the political spectrum. Its complex dynamic is admittedly difficult to understand compared with past radical movements, but it's far more destructive of people's lives. Sexual ideology not only divides women from men and children from parents, it also severs family ties, dissolves social institutions, and rationalizes the invasion and control of private life by state functionaries. It erodes family and public solvency and erects political tyranny. Yet professional conservatives prefer their familiar, safe battlegrounds, communism, socialism, and race. Yes, the radicals themselves have revived racial politics along with communist methods, but this is an optical illusion, a flanking maneuver to slip a more extreme sexual agenda under the radar. Well, yes, freedom from harm reduction. Conservatives are suckers for this. We have to let the gays marry. Why? Because it hurts their feelings if they can't. So people's feelings get hurt every single day. We have to let 12-year-old girls become boys. Why? Because their feelings will be hurt, terribly hurt, if we don't let them. So a 12-year-old girl's feelings are terribly hurt about every 5 minutes. She says she's going to kill herself if you don't let her. Oh, and you're going to argue in good faith on that basis? I demand you do this, or you will kill yourself? No, I'm not going to discuss a person who even dares to raise that. You know, people on the right could talk that way, but they don't want to be accused of hurting people's feelings. Baskerville continues, Black Lives Matter, for example, was created by radicalized women, but is not just pushing racial politics. It also empowers sexual militants. BLM's political platform includes statements such as queer affirming, transgender affirming, free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. BLM's goals are focused on disrupting the family and include phrases such as dismantle the patriarchal practice, disrupt the nuclear family structure, and collectively care for children. This is the perfect agenda, in fact, to further emasculate and criminalize the ever-disposable Black male for whom many progressives and conservatives seem to have nothing but disdain. Conflicts touted as racial are really familial and sexual. As I say, this is a very long piece, and it's a very thoughtful piece, and I recommend it to you. He also talks about, well, taking on the universities, which the conservatives, what have they done? They've moaned about it. They've made jokes about political PC culture. They still sent their children there with very sorry effects in many cases. Apparently, there's nothing that can be done about it because, oh, these are private institutions. Well, some of them are actually state institutions. Some of them are private. Politicos like Jerry Falwell Jr., Albert Mohler at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and Michael Ferris at Patrick Henry College, the right's preeminent never-Trumper and head of the Alliance Defending Freedom, all public figures with major public platforms show scant interest in reforming higher education or anything else for that matter. Few conservatives even bother to press for serious reform. They refuse not only to condemn the phony rape trials, but also fail to support the one official, then Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, who moved to curtail them. When attacked, they responded not by debating like scholars, but by trying to stop critics' mouths with lawsuits and more underhanded legal weapons. All of this demonstrates how conservative kingpins insulate their empires from criticism by intentionally marginalizing their own intellectuals, without whom conservatism remains incoherent, opportunistic, and reactive. It makes for a conservatism, Inc. that is complacent, spineless, and vulnerable to the allure of money. Its operating dynamic can only make the establishment right progressively more unprincipled and irrelevant, as attested to by warnings of permanent impotence following the 2020 election. Yeah, okay, sure, that is all true. It's all true. Stop calling yourself conservatives. Just stop. Oh, what you're doing is not conservative. Well, what you're doing is useless. Yeah, but what you're doing is not conservative. Okay, I'm not a conservative then. Okay, I don't want to be a loser. I don't want the world to go to hell in a handcart. Well, you smugly tell us, well, it's a private institution. There's nothing we can do about it. Why aren't you celebrating the Constitution? And nonsense like that. Patriot, that's a good word. I like that one. How about using that one? Speaking of what the universities, this is from Joy Pullman at The Federalist. Joe Biden is using your tax dollars to make American kids hate their country. Oh, as the scholar Ibram X. Kendi has expressed, yeah, Ibram X. Kendi. He had some very strong opinions about white people. Very strong indeed. He makes it very clear. Here we go. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is further discrimination. There you go. White people need to get it in the neck even more than they're getting it. There can be no living with such people. Can't be done. Here's a story from Summit News by Steve Watson. Kamala Harris can't stop laughing. No one else finds it funny. This suggestion was made, what, a month or so ago? Does she have a neurological disorder? Because either there's something wrong with her, medically, or she has decided to become the most smug, annoying woman on earth. Kamala Harris, who is effectively the president of the country at this point, cannot stop laughing at totally inappropriate times. The latest example came on Monday as Harris spoke in North Carolina about the administration's much maligned jobs plan. Harris attempted to crack a joke, suggesting that opportunities are equally available to women as well as men, like hard hats or something. Because there's an interesting fact, Harris said, struggling not to laugh at her own speech. In case you didn't know, hard hats are actually unisex. Despite the fact that literally no one knew what the hell she was laughing at or found what she was saying funny, Harris felt the need to blurt out loud, "Everybody's laughing." Caleb Hull tweeted, "Kamala Harris just tried to crack a joke. Ha ha, everybody's laughing." No one was laughing. Well, when Jeb Bush did something similar to this, he was reduced to "please clap." Kamala Harris laughs hysterically when discussing struggling parents who aren't able to send their kids to school. Do you have plans to visit the border? Harris, not today. Laughs. Oh, and I see there's a Kamala Harris laughing compilation. And there is a YouTube video there from the print. Is there something wrong with her? Yeah, I just think that there's two possibilities. In New Zealand, which is run by that sad Muslim lady, Jacinda Ardern. This is from Ross Ibbotson from the Mail. New Zealand has said it will no longer confront China over human rights as part of the Five Eyes intelligence network, reversing an earlier commitment to its allies. Foreign Minister Nanania Mahuta said New Zealand was uncomfortable with pressuring Beijing and wanted to pursue its own relationship with its largest trading partner. The Intelligence Sharing Alliance, formalized during the Cold War, last year began issuing statements condemning China's human rights record. Defense ministers from Britain, America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand agreed on this expanded remit last May to advance their shared values of democracy, freedom, and respect from human rights. The prospect of New Zealand being removed from the Five Eyes network has been raised in the past, with Peter Mattis, a former CIA China expert, saying in 2018 the country denied there's a problem when it comes to China. What this story, oh my God, I can't believe it. Okay, so this minister, Mahuta, she has Maori tribal tattoos on her lower lip and covering all of her jaw. What this story tells me is that you can just assume that New Zealand has been suborned by People's Republic of China to the extent that it simply cannot be trusted with any intelligence or with anything else. And do we have, yes, in more China news. This is from Vegeta Unial at Legal Insurrection. China mulls deploying troops to Afghanistan after U.S. pullout. Afghanistan is central to China's economic and military expansion in the Middle East and Eurasia. Is it? Is it now? Is Afghanistan central to anybody? Has it ever been central to anything? I know that people used to talk about the Great Game and such like in the 19th century. And then some, places, like Britain foolishly sent troops to Afghanistan where they died. China is considering sending troops to Afghanistan after the withdrawal. The Hong Kong daily South China Morning Post reported Friday, citing senior Chinese national security experts. The report comes after this week's announcement by President Joe Biden to withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan. 2,500 U.S. servicemen and a further 7,000 allied NATO troops will leave by September the 11th. Following the Biden White House announcement, China raised the alarm about the security situation in the Taliban-ridden country close to its western borders. There's nothing there. It's just mountains and wasteland. On Thursday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian warned that terrorist forces may take over Afghanistan once the U.S. pulls out. Afghanistan is strategic to China's economic and military expansion, also known as the Belt and Road Initiative. China's pretense that it is worried about rising Islam in the region is hypocritical at best. Beijing is supporting two of the worst terror-sponsoring regimes in its backyard, Iran and Pakistan. China is building a military and naval presence in neighboring Pakistan and has just recently signed a 25-year military economic pact with Iran. The situation in Afghanistan might go further into chaos in the future. Cross-border crime, drug trafficking, and the smuggling of firearms may proliferate. Well, I can hardly wait for this. That Britain got smacked down, and Russia got smacked down, and America and Canada and Britain again got smacked down. But now the Chinese are going to throw themselves, into the tar pit? Like Brer Rabbit. Yeah. I don't know. I think that the only military victory that would be possible in Afghanistan would require genocide. And by genocide, I mean real genocide, not sort of genocide. But the Chinese have shown themselves to be quite up for genocide many times in their past. So perhaps they're up for it again. And I think I'll end with this story. What makes a happy country? From the oddly named and placed DNYUZ.com. When governments around the world introduced coronavirus restrictions requiring people to stand 2 meters apart, jokes in Finland started circulating. Why can't we stick to the usual 4 meters? Finns embraced depictions of themselves as melancholic and reserved, of people who mastered social distancing long before the pandemic. A popular local saying goes, happiness will always end in tears. But for 4 consecutive years, Finland has been named the happiest country in the world by the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which publishes an annual report evaluating the happiness of people around the world. The latest report, published last month, has led some Finns to ask, really? 4 times in a row is too much, says Jukka Lindström, a writer and stand-up comedian. The weather is like the worst day in London every day, he said. There's definitely something in our history that makes us have this kind of low-level self-esteem as a nation, always feeling like an underdog. The World Happiness Report uses data from interviews of more than 350,000 people in 95 countries conducted by Gallup. The rankings are not based on factors like income or life expectancy, but on how people rate their own happiness on a 10-point scale. We believe that these subjective or self-perceived evaluations are a more reliable way to tell how good life is, says Shun Wang, professor of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management in South Korea and one of the report's authors. Questions included, did you smile or laugh a lot recently? Did you learn or do something interesting yesterday? Were you treated with respect all day long? Who is treated with respect all day long? Other questions relate to trust. Someone who thought the police or strangers were very likely to return his or her lost wallet had, on average, a much higher life evaluation score than someone who thought the opposite, researchers found. The authors came up with 6 categories to explain most of the difference in happiness between countries: gross domestic product per capita, social support, life expectancy, freedom to make life choices. Oh, so abortion makes people happier, does it? Generosity and perception of corruption levels. Dr. Wang said some results were surprising. Parts of Eastern Europe ranked relatively low on the list, despite having relatively good income levels, while in South America, the reverse was true. Happiness levels tended to be high, given relatively low income levels. I don't know how useful these questions are. You know, when you ask people, there's a common assumption today that people should be happy all the time. And if you're not happy all the time, then there's something seriously wrong with you. Are you depressed? Do you need treatment? Can we get you some pills? I think there's a big difference between being happy and being content. I think that happy refers to, I don't know, certain instances in life, perhaps, you know, certain periods in life. I don't think it's a continuous condition. And of course, different peoples have different ideas of what constitutes happiness. Indeed, freedom to make life choices. Well, it's long been my firm belief with Edmund Burke that the more choices that we have, the more ways we have to choose to be unhappy. Let's see. David Pfister, an architect from Austria who lives in a suburb of Helsinki, said that he would describe Finns as content, but that it was hard to say if they were happy. The baby has increased our happiness, said his wife Vera. Another man in the same suburb, Janne Berlini, said he was happy enough. I have work. The basic things are in order. People in Finland also tend to have realistic expectations for their lives. But when something in life does exceed expectations, people will often act with humility, preferring a self-deprecating joke over bragging, said Sari Poihonen, a linguistics professor at the University of, and I can't pronounce that. Finns, she said, are pros at keeping their happiness a secret. I don't know. That seems like a good idea to me. You know, over the years, when I've ever had people often aggressively talk about how happy they are, I've tended to doubt them, particularly, for instance, when they're talking about the level of success. Say, oh, we have such a great marriage, or we have such a great relationship. Do you? You sound kind of defensive to me. Let's have a final look at the chat. Texas Feral Hog says the reason ruling Afghanistan by USA is a failure is because every action our leaders take is corrupt. Media Hit says, I was open-minded about her strange new age ideas. Who is that? Who are we talking about here? COEYT stream. She blocked my comments on her D-Live, says Media Hits. I don't know who that is. Cecil Henry says both Emma Lazarus and Israel Zangville agreed that Jews should not be melted into a melting pot. They both wanted a homeland, especially for Jews. Well, that makes sense. And Media Hits. People who take widely acknowledged physical science principles, Eastern religious text, and some made-up ideas to create one's own philosophy, then be extra sensitive to any comment or question. Okay, what's coming up later in the week? On Thursday, I'm going to be discussing certainly the first movie from Korea that I have talked about, not the first movie from Asia. It is Parasite by Bong Joon-ho from 2 years ago, a movie that was praised to the skies and won an Academy Award for Best Picture. A week after that, Rainer Werner Fassbinder's Berlin Alexanderplatz. So I better get started rewatching that. And on the book club, as previously mentioned, I am going to be talking about on Friday Andy No's book, Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. And I know all this stuff. He's recounting everything that happened last year, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and it's just still outraging. Complete collapse of public order. I mean, complete in places like Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, etc. And it is if, as No suggests many times, that the politicians and the media are working for Antifa. On April 30th, I'm going to be discussing a novel about how horrible it is to be a male in today's China. It's by Maggie Shen King. It is called An Excess Male. And on Music Monday, next Monday, I'm going to be giving a little primer for collecting classical music, because this is the best time there has ever been to buy classical music, because it is so cheap compared to what it used to be if you're not buying the latest releases. So I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button. And subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. If you would like to make a contribution to this live stream, which would be exceedingly appreciated in the very tenuous situation in which I find myself, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, a donation to the live stream can be made directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and indeed civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.